How did the Mormon community evolve from doing all it could to protect the secrecy of plural marriages to eventually surveilling them? One of the most fascinating periods of Mormon history is the awkward transition from their devotedly polygamous phase to eventually their devotedly monogamous phase. This blurry period in the middle that we call this post-Manifesto polygamy time, where the LDS institution and leaders were still sacralizing some plural marriages, denying it to the federal government, and often there are lots of members of the faith who were stuck in the middle, not knowing which way to go. Leaders and members alike were trying to avoid being fugitives from justice. Some of the same neighbors who previously did all they could to protect their polygamous neighbors were now ratting them out. It is a fascinating era, I promise. And some people often got stuck in those crossroads. Today, I'm talking about one woman who fits that description. Her name was Margaret Geddes Eccles, and how she represents a much larger story. She first became a plural wife in the 1880s, and her community succeeded in keeping her plural marriage private so that she and her husband never faced criminal proceedings. But then she became a plural wife a decade later after her first husband died, and this time, her community ended up being an enemy to her as a result of the secrecy of her post-Manifesto sealing. This is actually a useful case study to explore these broader contours of post-Manifesto polygamy during the 1890s and early 1900s. It's also the topic of a brand new article published by the religious studies scholar and historian Hannah Young that appeared in the most recent issue of the Journal of Mormon History. The article is titled "The Secret Life of a Plural Wife: Gossip and Community Witnessing of Polygamy." Now, I'm a nerd, you all know this, but some of my favorite days of the year is when a new issue of the Journal of Mormon History appears. The journal is published by the Mormon History Association. You all know I'm in the can. I'm a supporter. I'm actually wearing a Mormon History Association conference shirt today. Over my shoulder, you have the Donnie and Marie Osmond toy that I was gifted at the end of my presidential term. But I love highlighting the great scholarship that comes out of this journal that publishes quarterly, so every 3 months. It's edited by my good friend Christopher Jones, a professor of history at Brigham Young University, and I actually did a video on the release of the issue before this a few months ago where I talked with Dr. Andrea Radke Moss about another story of the secrecy of polygamy, in this case the example of these seemingly monogamous public Mormon women who are secretly sealed to deceased wives. It's a fascinating story. I recommend going to check it out if you haven't yet. But in this video, I want to continue that tradition of celebrating a new release of Journal of Mormon History. I'll summarize key elements of Margaret Eccles' story. I promise you, they are fascinating. Then I am privileged to talk with the author of the article, Dr. Hannah Young, who answers some of my questions and places the article within the broader context of her own work, as well as American history. And then finally, I'll talk with the editor of the journal, Dr. Christopher Jones, so you can hear what else you can learn from this latest issue. All right, I think that's enough to cover in this video, so let's dig in. The key figure at the center of our story is a woman named Margaret, who's going to take on some additional last names due to her marriages. She converts to Mormonism and moves to Utah from Glasgow, Scotland in 1884. She very soon, by the end of that year, gets sealed as a plural wife to William Geddes, who served his mission in Scotland, which that is not a coincidence. This is a common story. See my video last week from the wife of one of these missionaries who was terrified that her husband was going to do the same thing. But this is a tough time to enter plural marriage because the federal government is doing all it can to stamp out the practice. And so those who practice polygamy, which the church was urging its members to do, were taking on a massive risk. And to be able to protect them, the LDS communities had created these secret whisper networks and layers of security, lookouts, hiding places, code names, to be able to protect them from prosecution and imprisonment. The Mormon creed during this time that they often said was mind your own business, all in an attempt to save these plural marriages from justice. And what's notable is that Margaret and William succeed. They are never caught by the authorities, neither of them are ever tried or let alone sent to jail. However, within a few years, William passes away while Margaret was pregnant with their fourth child, which is a tough situation in now the post-Manifesto era. Because remember, in 1890, Wilford Woodruff, the president of the LDS Church, issued a manifesto that said, "We are no longer practicing plural marriage." So what is she going to do? Well, for a while, she is taken care of financially by William's old employer, David Eccles. And yes, this is that Eccles family. If you live in Salt Lake City and Utah, you see the Eccles name everywhere. Yes, it's that Eccles family. Eventually, they are sealed to each other, and she becomes a plural wife in August 1898. They are sealed. This is post Wilford Woodruff's manifesto, because church leaders are still sealing a number of people to post-manifesto plural unions. And they're sealed by an apostle, Mariner Merrill, who was known for really being gung-ho and perpetuating the practice of polygamy. They weren't sealed in a temple. That would have been too risky. So they take the clandestine sealing location of the Eccles Lumber Company office. You know, what you dream of to get sealed in. And then within a year, she bears David Eccles a child, but they keep this a secret, trying to hide it. In fact, David Eccles hides this marriage from his own plural wives, which is not the best thing to do. They also tried to avoid federal prosecution, and she barely escapes ecclesiastical discipline, and she survives only because of some apostolic intervention. Again, this is this awkward moment where the church is publicly going one way, privately trying to maintain another way, and people get lost in the middle. Now, eventually, this story takes a juicy turn because David Eccles dies, and then there's a question of whether Margaret's son is going to get any inheritance from his polygamous father. And that becomes a statewide scandal, lots of attention, lots of investigation. That's why we get a lot of the documents. Now, I don't want to expose what comes of this trial. You have to read the article to find out because it's fascinating. I will just say the same mechanisms and activities that had been used to protect her family are now putting her own family at risk. Like I said, it's a fascinating story, which is why I strongly recommend the article. I'll link to it in the video description. By the way, just a reminder that if you enjoy this type of nerdy content, make sure you are subscribed to this channel. I do deep dives on topics every Monday. I connect the past to the present every Wednesday, and I pull back the curtain on historians' work every Friday, either talking with historians of new works like I am today, or looking at classic books and articles in the field, or looking at the sources behind those arguments so that you can refine your own historical analysis. And if you want to give back, and I'm so grateful for the many of you who have given back, you can become a member, where for a very nominal fee, you get early access to the videos, you get little icons next to your name, you get to ask questions that I might be able to answer in my Monday mailbag videos, and most importantly, you can feel good about supporting public-facing, rigorous scholarship. I also recommend subscribing to my free Kit newsletter that I send out every few weeks or so with links and updates and announcements, and you can follow me on my different social media platforms, especially Instagram, where I do supplemental material. But that's enough boring business. I apologize I need to go through this every time, but let's get back to today's topic at hand. I am so thrilled today to interview my good friend and scholarly colleague, Dr. Hannah Young, the author of the article that we're discussing today, The Secret Life of a Plural Wife. Dr. Young received her PhD from Brandeis University, one of the most prestigious doctoral programs in history in the nation. She was the Mormon Studies Dissertation Fellow at the University of Utah, which allowed her access to a lot of the sources that formed the basis of her research. And she taught for a while at Utah Valley University and now teaches at the University of Alabama, both in the honors program and the religious studies department. She is a very popular teacher, including courses on Taylor swift and American culture and religion that I wish I could take, and she is working on her dissertation turned book on the end of polygamy and what it tells us about gender, secrecy, community, and power. And the reason we're talking to her today, she's the author of the new article, The Secret Life of a Plural Wife, Gossip and Community Witnessing of Polygamy. So let's get to that conversation. All right, we are now privileged to hear from the author of the article, Dr. Hannah Young. Hannah, thank you so much for taking a few minutes to talk with me.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, we're going to start very broad and then narrow into the specific story and then go broad again and talk about your bigger project. So let's start with the transition from Mormon polygamy to monogamy in general, which is, of course, one of the most fascinating topics. What drew you to this era and this theme for your studies?
Yeah, great question. So my interests have always been in religion and gender and families. And so I think that and I've always loved to study Mormon history. And so I've always been kind of drawn to polygamy just as it is. But where I got particularly interested in this topic is for one of my first research projects in grad school, I did something about midwives. And through my research on midwives, I found in the late 19th century, I found all of these like really fun trial transcripts in the newspapers of midwives being called to and subpoenaed, and they would give basically the reason why the midwives were being subpoenaed is because they had, or at least so the prosecutors thought, these like unique view into who the father of a baby was, right? And so they would often be called to testify about the paternity of plural wives' babies. And I basically found that these midwives would give the most ridiculous reasons why they couldn't answer the questions, like they've never kept records in their life. They don't ask about the fathers of the children. They don't, there's all of these different ways where it was like, I think actually a midwife does know that. And, traditionally in, say, Laurel Thatcher Ulrich's A Midwife's Tale, like this is one of the things that she discusses, that midwives are supposed to know the paternity of a father. But, the midwives were so obstinate and just like refused to say anything useful whatsoever. And I was like, what is going on with these funny midwives? And as I looked into these cases more generally, these unlawful cohabitation trial cases that there's like, over 1,000 of them that happened in the 1880s, there was all of these weird moments where parents didn't know who their child was married to. Community members refused to say who, they refused to say anything about like who was married to who. And so there was just like all of this kind of obstinacy that was kind of pointed to the, like almost to the ridiculousness of this whole thing. There was one example of a child, a stepchild who was called to testify about his stepfather, and the prosecutor was asking these questions, and you didn't really see the questions, but you saw the responses, and the responses were like, "Oh yeah, I've seen the defendant and my mother in the same bedroom together. My mother did have a child during this period. I don't know who the father of that child was," and all of these different things. And I thought, like, what is going on with these funny trials? And so then I began to get interested in the secrecy of it all, and how community members would keep each other's secrets or not. And then as I began to like look at secrecy and secret keeping, I then realized that this is something that reached far beyond the 1880s and these particular trials, and reach into the 1890s, much after the 1890 Manifesto, and then the early 20th century as well.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm digging back in my brain to the last time I taught Laurel Thatcher Ulrich's Midwife's Tale. Wasn't there a sense in Puritan New England that the woman in the moment of childbirth could not lie about the paternity? Am I remembering correctly?
Yeah, so the idea was that the midwife was supposed to ask the laboring woman quote, in the throes of childbirth, and you're not capable of lying. So this goes, you're not capable of lying when you're in so much pain in the throes of childbirth. And that was when a midwife was supposed to ask an unmarried woman who the father of her child was. So yeah, so this was actually kind of traditionally the task of a midwife to ask about paternity. And so the fact that these Mormon midwives refused to do so, or refused at least to like witness that they had done so, spoke to something kind of broader for me.
Yeah. So, like any good Mormon studies scholar, you're now taking that topic and reaching a broader conclusion, saying that this is not just a fascinating story, though it certainly is a fascinating story of this Mormon community creating ways to protect the secrecy of plural marriages. But this actually tells us about conceptions of gender and power and secrecy. Why does the story matter to people beyond just those interested in the end of Mormon polygamy?
Yeah, great question. So what I think is that, or what this story in particular has helped me realize, is that Mormon polygamy represents this uniquely well documented instance of the ways in which families experience kind of this transitional moment. But I think more broadly, what this article does, and then also what my broader book project does, is it shows the ways that communities police people on really intimate levels. So, and this is not just happening with polygamists, but it also happens with interracial families, interracial couples. It happens with people who are gay and lesbian during the Lavender Scare. It happens with people who are trying to pass for white, like in different moments, right? So there's all of these ways in which communities will validate like the most kind of intimate moments of our lives, whether it's our family, our sexuality, our racial presentation. And what I think is really great about this particular case study is just how much we have access to, the emotions of the people who are going through it. So often with interracial couples, they're not writing like, "Dear Diary, today nobody noticed me, and that made me feel this way," right? But polygamists are often writing in that kind of very confessional, very explicit way, either later in their memoirs or in their private diaries. And so I think it's like this really unique opportunity to take this like very well documented people and then understand kind of a broader mode of surveillance, like, this community level of surveillance that happens in all these other moments in American history.
Yeah, so well put. So let's get to the case study of this particular article. How
Sure.
did you stumble upon Margaret Geddes Eccles, and how did
Yes.
you investigate it? How did that story unfold? Walk us through your process as a history detective.
Yeah, so the very first thing that I did when I was starting my dissertation research, in fact, I was on the plane flying to Salt Lake, about to spend 5 weeks in Utah to do my research, and I had a copy of B. Carmen Hardy's book, Solemn Covenant. And I had just kind of like, I had flipped through it and I knew that it was kind of relevant. But then as I was really reading it, I was like, wow, this is amazing. And so I just took all of his footnotes, and like that became the basis of all of the places that I started first. And I just looked at detail at everything that he mentioned. And it became kind of like the starting point for me. And, he wrote his book, Solemn Covenant, 30 years ago, or over 30 years ago now. And so I think that now with, the different way that academia is and my different types of training, that I can take some of those stories that he mentioned and look at them through a new lens and kind of give them a fresh look and all of that. And so he writes about Maggie or Margaret's story in, he just has a few lines about her. Like, isn't it kind of funny that, and he tells this story about her, and I was like, oh, that's really interesting. So I decided to look up her story in the newspaper, and I just saw that there was so much coverage of her story when it came out, like in the big Eccles case that I talk about at the end of the article. And then, I was looking up I looked her up on Family Search, and I saw that she had this narrative, and this 11-page handwritten narrative that was like very short. And so that kind of went into it. And I started to find all these other little things after I'd found those few lines in Solemn Covenant. And one of the things I'm most proud of from my research of that time is that I was going through this guy who called himself a Mormon spy. I was going through his own memoir of the time that he spied on the Mormons. His name's Charles Mostyn Owen. And he had this like book of basically couples that he thought were polygamous in the early 20th century. And and he had some question marks, and I was reading through it when I was writing this, and I saw her name, and I was like so excited about that. And I saw who informed upon her in that moment, and it ended up being kind of like the brother of her lawyer later on. And so there was these kind of little funny connections that I was able to make, but the picture of from Charles Mostyn Owen's book is in the article, because I was so happy with finding that little moment.
Yeah, wonderful. So what does Maggie's story do to both challenge or perpetuate or help us understand this broader story of the awkward transition from polygamy to monogamy and the community shift from protection to surveillance and all these broader themes that you look at?
Yeah, so historians of Mormonism have done a really good job so far at talking about the institutional change in the era of, basically 1890 onward, right? So the Manifesto and how Mormonism changes, right? So Thomas Alexander wrote a book, Mormonism in Transition. There's all sorts of historians who have often published things, 30 years ago, basically, who have talked about institutional change, who have focused on how leaders were conceptualizing how to change this era, like that kind of stuff. And my addition to this understanding is talking about things on the family and community level. Because basically, I argue that polygamists become isolated, not just because the church starts excommunicating them, but because their marriages are increasingly not recognized as valid in their own religious community, the religious community that give those marriages meaning to begin with, right? So it's not just, it's not something that can really be imposed from the top down. You have to get community buy-in, and that community buy-in, that surveillance, that witnessing, is all part of the reason why polygamy gets increasingly isolated eventually kind of out of mainstream Mormonism. But something that I realized that I had never quite realized before when I started this project, I thought like, oh, polygamy ends in 1890, and then eventually fundamentalist groups come and they splinter off. But what I didn't realize is those splinters happen in the 1930s, right? So you have this like 40-year period basically between 1890 and 1930, or the 1930s, where there's a bit of like ambiguity in the way that the church is treating polygamy. And so, yeah, that's what my book is about.
All right. So let's talk about that book, because people who are going to read this article are going to be, their next question is going to be like, well, where's the book? So why don't you talk about how does this story fit into your broader monograph project?
Yeah, so this is the first chapter that I wrote for my dissertation. It's not the first chapter of my dissertation, but really all of the themes that are in this article are going to be explored further in the book itself. So if you like stuff about secrecy, surveillance, if you like stuff about spies and apostates, witnessing people, if you like stuff about, the religious policing and church courts and excommunication, whispering, gossip, nosy neighbors, the burden of secrecy, right? So all of this stuff is within the article, but all of that stuff kind of gets like pulled out and explored through other people's stories as well. And so, yeah, I think there's basically kind of like all the nuggets of the things that I want to talk about in my book are in that article. And that's one of the things that I like about it as an article. The book is not going to be out for a while, but I am working on a bunch of different pieces right now. I just published a piece in the Mormon Studies Review about kind of the different interesting ways that Mormons, both polygamists, kept secrets and then also recorded their experiences constantly. And so that they were both kind of capturing their experiences of polygamy, but then also kind of captured by the records of polygamy. So that's something that I've published recently. And now I've lost track a little bit of your question, but
well, just how it fits within the book. And you've mostly answered that. Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much both for spending some time with me answering my questions, but more importantly, writing such a provocative and thoughtful article that I really think lots of people should read.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks again to Dr. Young for giving me some of her time to talk about her article and share why it's such a fascinating story and how she came about writing it. Now, I'm very pleased to speak to one of my best friends and a leading light in the Mormon studies field, Dr. Christopher Jones, who is an assistant professor of history at Brigham Young University, editor of the Journal of Mormon History. He received his PhD from the College of William and Mary, and his first big monograph that I'm so excited that people need to go and pre-order now, I'll put a link in the video description, is Methodist Connections, Early American Religion in the Revolutionary Atlantic World. It is going to blow your socks off. But for now, we're talking about the Mormon work that he can speak to from his position as a Journal of Mormon History as we cover the latest issue of the Journal of Mormon History. Let's get to that interview. I'm now pleased to be joined by the editor of Journal of Mormon History, Dr. Christopher Jones. Christopher, thanks for taking some time to talk with me today.
Thanks for having me on again, Ben.
All right, so I've already talked to Dr. Young about her wonderful article on the secret life of a plural wife. That might not even be the best article title in this volume, though, because there are several. I don't know if you're carving out a niche in academia for great article titles, but this issue is filled with them. So why don't you take us through what else should people be looking for in this newest issue of Journal of Mormon History?
Yeah, absolutely. If I can just say one thing about Hannah's article. I know you've talked to her. I know readers are familiar with it. I just want to say this is one of my very favorite things that we've ever published. It does two things that I think the very best historical scholarship does. One, it tells just a gripping and fascinating story. I was immediately drawn in the first time I read this, right? And then second, it uses that story to tell us something important, to make some sort of insightful point, right? In this instance, the role that neighbors and community played in either keeping secret or exposing sort of illicit unions and relationships in this post-Manifesto polygamy world. So I love Hannah's article. I'm so delighted to have it published in this issue. But as you noted, the issue has several other really fantastic pieces. Mason Allred of BYU Hawaii has contributed this incredible article on Orson Hyde's mission to Palestine in 1840. And I'll admit that when he first sent it to us, I thought, what new is there to say about this, right? This is sort of well-trod ground in Mormon historiography. But what Mason does particularly well here is use Orson Hyde's experience. So this is Orson Hyde, the Mormon apostle, goes to Palestine and dedicates the Holy Land for the preaching of the gospel and the return of the house of Israel, right? The gathering of the house of Israel. He does this in 1840. But something Mason noticed is that when he first leaves, he's identifying himself as a Jew, as a descendant of Judah, as a member of not just the house of Israel, right, but Judah specifically. And by the time his mission ends, he's rejected that identity almost entirely. He still thinks about himself as a member of the house of Israel, right? But his attitude and understanding of his relationship within this broader sort of Israelite community, both literal and adopted, has shifted, right? And so he uses Hyde's experience to trace sort of these broader shifts within European understandings of Jewish identity, of anti-Semitism of the mid-19th century, and the way that the Latter-day Saint experience and understanding is situated within that.
Yeah, and if I could butt in on
Yeah.
two things I really liked about this. One is you really see the origins of the modern conception of Zionism coming into play. And so I think a lot of people whose interest might be piqued with modern news stories are going to learn a lot about just that topic through this case study, which I thought was very well done. And second, we got to give full credit to the great title of the article, which is playing off of one of his interlocutors. Is it Joshua Herschel? I forget the guy's first name, but very prominent Jewish intellectual that Hyde ends up corresponding with. And so he titles the article Dr. Herschel and Mr. Hyde.
Yeah, it's very well done.
Yeah, restorationalism, nationalism, and Orson Hyde's shifting Jewish identity. So I just want to throw in, I love the article as well.
Good. Following that, we have another great title. Many are called, but few are curators. A missionary, his photographs, and the complexities of Samoan colonialism. So this is authored by Elise Hatch, a kind of up-and-coming scholar that looks at the missionary experience of Harry Dean, this Latter-day Saint missionary in Samoa in the mid-1910s, and a collection of photographs, not that he takes while a missionary, right? You and I and other returned missionaries may have come home with our collection of photographs, but he actually purchases about 60 photographs, kind of well-known photographs in Samoa that attempt to sort of portray Samoan life, right? It is from this very kind of European colonial gaze. And so she looks at why he purchases these particular photographs, what it means, the way he curates them, and what that might tell us about Mormon participation in this kind of colonial movement, or at least this colonial visual gaze in the early 20th century. And I'm delighted, especially because we were able to include, I think, 7 or 8 of these photographs. I would have liked to include maybe all of them, but we get a sense of kind of the photographs he's collecting and taking, and then she uses that alongside his diary to try and better understand the ways in which Mormons were part of this kind of colonial project, but also the ways that they stood apart from it, that I found really, really fascinating.
Yeah, I thought the photographs of themselves are worth looking at, but also the way this missionary tries to posit himself as both this insider, outsider, this liminal space that I thought was quite fascinating.
Yeah, and I think this is in many ways the future of sort of missionary studies, right? The study of Christian missions and the way that Mormon missionaries fit within that, right, is they are part of this broader kind of Christian missionary project historically, while also they always stand out and stand separate, right? They find themselves as the antagonists of many Protestant missionaries, even as they're participating in many of the same kind of broader processes and trends. So we followed that up with an essay by the ever-productive Brian C. Hells, that sort of shifts in terms of Brian's own recent research interest from polygamy, which he has long studied, to looking at Joseph Smith and the publication of the Book of Mormon. In his essay, Brian attempts to situate Joseph Smith as the Book of Mormon's what he calls managing editor, using a very kind of modern term and understanding to try and make sense of what Joseph Smith's role was in the translation, dictation, publication, and especially the revision of the Book of Mormon during his lifetime. I think, as always, Hells's research will elicit varied responses, right? Some people will find it very compelling. Others will be frustrated by it and disagree strongly. But I think the one thing we can always say is that there are a few researchers that are more sort of exhaustive and comprehensive, right? And so several sort of there's several tables and charts and images in here. And this is probably half of what I think Brian wanted to publish in terms of that, right? And so we had to say, hey, we have limited space. Let's kind of scale this back a little bit. But I think it really contributes to these ongoing conversations about understanding Joseph Smith and the Book of Mormon during his lifetime.
Yeah, and I especially like the sections on the revision portion of the Book of Mormon. That was a lot of new stuff to me that really opened my mind to questions about how the Book of Mormon is seen as this living text through even Joseph Smith's life, a concept that ends up being lost after Joseph Smith's life when we see it more as this fixed text.
Yeah, this thing that he reveals, that he dictates, that he translates, whatever word somebody that he writes, whatever word somebody wants to use, right? but it's a continuously edited, document as well.
Yeah, I agree.
And then the last essay. So I sometimes say that I am interested in the history of just about absolutely everything. I've read books on the history of bagels and everything else. And so when the author here, Chad Nilsson, sent this article in, I thought I'd never even thought about this handbell ensemble at Temple Square having a history, right? And so it's sort of a short but fascinating history of the bells at Temple Square. This is the handbell ensemble that has since 2005, I think, accompanied the Tabernacle Choir in many of their concerts and programming. The author's article, Chad Nilsson, is a member of that handbell ensemble, and so he kind of gives us an insider's look here. But this isn't like a personal reflective essay. It's very much a sort of historical article. He had access because of his membership in that organization, participation, and he interviewed a number of fellow members of the ensemble, people that were involved, sort of musical leaders, interviewed them and got access to kind of the history of this. But then he also situates that within the longer history of handbell ensembles, which are initially brought to Utah in the late 19th century, by Protestant Christian groups, right? And then kind of adapted and embraced by Latter-day Saints. And so when I say that I'm interested in the history of just about everything, I think this article proves that. And I hope a number of other readers will find it interesting as well. And then the issue wraps up with a couple of book reviews, reviews of two really important books published in the recent past. Christine Talbot's short biography of Sonia Johnson, which is reviewed here by Marie Stengo. And then Brian Cannon's new biography of David O. McKay that's reviewed by Joey Stewart. And so if readers have not read those books yet, I'd recommend both of them, but maybe they can start by grabbing a copy of this issue and reading the reviews of those and see if it sort of whets their appetite for picking up the volumes.
Yeah, I enjoyed both books that were reviewed, and I thought the reviews brought up good questions that I hadn't considered, which is
Agreed.
what a good book review should do. And I'll also say that Chad Nielsen's article I really enjoyed by putting Mormon music within this broader denominational context, that it were these Protestants that brought in, and what are the boundaries. And it starts with this wonderful anecdote of Craig Jessup and a mission companion attending one of these bells types of conferences, and the commander's like, I don't know if we're supposed to be here, and instead Jessup was like, no, this is crucial, and then he ends up being the MOTAB director that incorporates them. So I thought it was great. So a really wonderful issue of Mormon history, and I like how you point out that we're interested in the history of everything Mormonism. That there's nothing that escapes the grasp, whether it be the Book of Mormon, which is always going to receive more attention, all the way to handbells and how they connect music, all the way to these photographs of Samoa and these different things, that it really captures the capacious nature of our field.
Yeah, and I think several of these articles, Hannah's comes to mind, Chad's, as well as Elise's, they're writing about a lot of individuals whose stories are not well known, whose names may not even be recognizable, right? And they're using these seemingly obscure stories to tell us kind of much bigger histories, right? And so sometimes I think, especially people that aren't formally trained as historians, and there's a lot of them that contribute to Mormon history as a field, sometimes feel a little intimidated that they're interested in something, but they think, oh, this is too obscure. There's nothing really here, right? And I want to say, actually, there is. The trick is going to be finding out what that story tells us about Mormon history more generally, or about some aspect of the Latter-day Saint past.
Yeah, and one final thing to say about this issue that really stood out to me is the broad spectrum of participants of doing history here. We have an early career academic in Hannah Young. We have a more established scholar in Mason Allred. We have kind of an established independent scholar in Brian Hales. Then we have Chad Nielsen, who I'm pretty sure has 30 hours a day, because I don't know how he's able to produce as much as he does.
Yes.
And so we have people that show that you can do Mormon history from all these different backgrounds with some institutional attachments with independent status and produce important work that's going to help shape the field.
Yeah, and part of the process that they go through with the journal, right, is they submit these articles and then they get reviewed by anonymous peer reviewers. And those reviewers, whether it's reviewing an established scholar like Mason, right, or a first-time author like Elise Hatch or Hannah Young, give really important feedback that then those authors have to go back and engage with. And that might require more reading on their part. It might be checking out a new collection of primary sources they hadn't considered. It might be reading a book or an article, and in all of their instances, it requires a lot of revision that I work with them, through that process. And so these articles, as they're published, were submitted in many instances in quite a different state, right? And then it's exciting to see those develop. And maybe that's just a little behind the scenes peek for your listeners. So
yeah, no, I think that's great. Well, thanks again for taking some time with me and for producing important scholarship in the latest issue of Journal of Mormon History.
Yeah, and really quick, Ben, we did this last time. I want to do it again. I have another issue to give away here. I was delighted to send one out last time. So if you want to sort of facilitate that and figure out who gets their free copy this year, send your name and address to Ben, and he'll pass that along to me, and I'll get this in the mail as soon as I get that.
Absolutely. I'll have details in the video right after this of how we can raffle off this issue. And then if you miss out and don't get the issue, guess what? You just have to register as an MHA member, and then you get free access anyway.
Perfect. Awesome. Thanks, Ben.
Thanks again to Dr. Jones for spending some time and talking to me about this fascinating issue. If that doesn't get you excited to want to go read the entire issue, I don't know what will. I strongly recommend becoming a member of the Mormon History Association, which is what gives you access to the journal. You can either subscribe to get print issues like I do. I always have the latest issue on my nightstand, and that's usually the last thing I read before I go to bed until I exhaust the entire issue. Then I have to wait for the next one. But you can also get immediate access to the digital copies of the journal too. So if you went to the Mormon History Association website now, subscribed, within 5 minutes, you could be reading all of these articles. I will put a link to the subscription page in the video description. And I like these videos because they are a reminder that the content that I'm covering here on this YouTube channel is only possible due to the work done by these many scholars who devote months and years and decades to digging into these stories and making these archival records digestible and interpreted for the general public. What you see on social media channels, including my various channels, is just the tip of the iceberg. And I hope, my sincere wish is that after you watch these videos and listen to me drone on, is that you want to go and get the actual brunt of the research. You will go read the articles, you will go read the books, because that's where the real scholarship is done. History has never been more relevant than it is today because it allows us to dissect these crucial stories and see what they tell us about humanity, society, and religion, and ourselves. And the Journal of Mormon History does that just about as well as anywhere.